Hey there guys, so AliExpress is having their back to school sale site-wide right now, and I want to highlight one of my favorite mini PCs that they currently have available, and that is the GMK Tech K6. This is a Ryzen 7 7840HS mini PC that I picked up bare bones, and I do recommend that you get it bare bones as well. And this system is a fantastic value. Now, I know what you're thinking, isn't the Ryzen 7 7840HS pretty old at this point? Here's the thing, anything that is actually better than this is a grossly expensive system, because anything like the 8845HS or the 8745HS or any of these different refreshes of this chip, they're all exactly the same. We're talking about minor clock speed differences amongst all of them. I don't think it's worth you spending an extra $50 or $100 or sometimes even $200 more for effectively the same performance. This is just a great value for money, especially because anything that is meaningfully an upgrade over this, we're talking about the Zen 5 APUs, something like the HX370. Those systems are still grossly expensive. We're talking about almost $1,000 for a mini PC that is going to at best have a 30% improvement over this. Spending twice as much money for 30% more performance. I don't know about you, but that doesn't seem like a great value proposition here. And it does still have some pretty interesting hardware choices. For example, we do get the dual USB 3.0s in the front, get the headphone jack, power button, reset switch, but we also do get a Thunderbolt 4 compatible USB-C port. So that does mean that you could, in theory, use a Thunderbolt eGPU with this. I wouldn't really recommend a setup like that, but if that is something that you already have, you're just looking for a system to pair with it, this will work for that. But that does also mean that you could use Thunderbolt compatible devices, and this CPU is going to be more than powerful enough to actually work with any kind of hardware like that. We are talking about 8 Zen 4 cores with hyperthreading, so that is 16 threads, Zen 4 levels of performance. That's still really high performance, especially because the IPC upgrade from Zen 4 to Zen 5 wasn't really all that dramatic. And if we take a look at the back, we have some of my favorite aspects of it. One being, of course, the fact that we get both HDMI and DisplayPort. I love seeing DisplayPort on mini PCs. I've always found DisplayPort to give me far less issues with things like ultra-wide monitors and high resolution, high refresh rate displays. So anytime I see a mini PC that has it, that's a huge win. And of course, we do still have HDMI for all the people out there that still rely on HDMI. Considering that I do capture footage on this system, I do need the HDMI, but if I'm using this thing day to day, it's through DisplayPort most of the time. And of course, I do like the fact that we get dual 2.5 gigabit ports. In fact, while testing this system, I was downloading games onto this computer, and what I ended up finding is that some of the games that I was downloading were transferring over my network because I already had them downloaded on my main gaming PC. And since that system is hooked up over 2.5 gigabit to my network, this thing was downloading those games at 1.5 gigabit speeds. Now that's not 2.5 gigabit, but the reason it was doing that is because the SSD that I use for my games in my gaming PC, well, that thing is quite a few years old now. It's a PCI 3.0 SSD that I've had for maybe 5-6 years now. It wasn't exactly the highest quality SSD, but I mean, it's held out for a very long time. Being able to transfer a 50 gigabyte game over my network, and it's done transferring before I even finish watching a 5-minute YouTube video, that's pretty great. And with having the dual ports, that does mean that if you are looking to set up a small home server, this thing is really great for that. You can essentially have a dedicated connection for a virtual machine if that's something that you want to do. You're able to effectively turn this thing into a router by being able to plug one of these to a switch, and it just gives you a lot more flexibility. All of this at a package that is very competitive with everything around this price point. You can find this for $330 right now on AliExpress, and at that price point, bare bones, which I do recommend you get it bare bones because you can upgrade it to whatever RAM and SSD combo that you want, this is very competitively priced. But let's jump on in and take a look at the performance of this system. So starting off the benchmarks, we are taking a look at Rainbow Six Siege X running with the built-in benchmark. This is at the medium graphics settings, though we do have the textures and anisotropic filtering set to their maximum. So ultra textures and 16x filtering. And the level of performance that we get out of this system is pretty spectacular. I will say one thing though, by default, the system defaults to allocating 3 gigabytes of RAM as VRAM. I went into the BIOS and just bumped that up to 8. You don't need to do this, though I would recommend that you bump it up to at least 4. That should avoid problems in pretty much all games, but I just did 8 gigabytes because I have the headroom since I went with 32 gigabytes of RAM in here. But the level of performance that we get at the medium graphics with these maxed out textures is pretty great. Our FPS average is comfortably above 60 and our 1% lows are so close to 60 that you'd realistically not have any issues with this. Of course, if you are looking to maximize the performance, you can bump things down and get a bump in your performance. Though I would drop FSR from ultra quality down to quality first before you start messing with that. And I did use, of course, FSR 2.0. So with the spectacular result that we got with Rainbow Six Siege X, it only made sense to try out the most popular game on Steam, that being Counterstrike 2. Here you can see it running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, though we aren't using FSR. FSR is disabled. The level of performance that we're getting out of this is pretty spectacular. It clears practically any other mini PC that you could find at this price point. And if you pay attention to the temperatures we're getting, it's also staying well within a great operating range here. And what this really shows is that not only do you get great performance, but you also get proper cooling, which is something nice to see because a lot of the times systems around this price point or cheaper with the same hardware tend to skimp out on the cooling system, and that could really hamper your performance and it could really limit your TDP. Here, because we're able to use all the way up to 50 watts of power, the result is really, really nice. Of course, that's not going to give you a boost in your GPU if it's not really all that necessary, and as you can see, the 780M is right now not at 100% utilization, so we do have the headroom to turn up some graphics settings. And well, this is what I think is so great about the 780M in 2025. It gives your system more than enough performance to do well in a lot of really popular titles, and you can actually play a good assortment of games throughout multiple different generations. For example, one of my most played games on Steam is Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. I play this game a lot in my private time, and as you can see here with the medium graphics settings and maxed out textures, we're able to get a pretty great result. This is a title that most other mini PCs out there can play, but they'll play it at the low or very low graphics settings. And there is a pretty substantial visual difference between medium and low. A much bigger leap in terms of visuals than medium and high or medium and ultra. This genuinely feels like an upgrade over Warband, while playing at the low or very low graphics settings seems more like Warband with slight graphical improvements. And while talking more about the types of games that I personally play, games like Gunfire Reborn are exactly the types of games that I end up playing most time, at least when it comes to playing with my friends. Most of us being in our mid to late 20s, when we all get together to game, we tend to stick more toward co-op type games and a lot less competitive titles. We're just past that. I mean, I personally still play Marvel Rivals quite a bit, but I'm not playing ranked or anything like that. I'm pretty much a casual player there. Same with games like Fortnite. So when I'm playing with a group of friends, it's games like this that we're spending the most amount of time in. So the fact that something like this runs really well, and keep in mind that those 1% lows that you're seeing there, a lot of the times are that low specifically just because every time you go through a new area in this game, it gives you a loading screen. So that brings down the 1% lows, but if you look at the frame time charts, not only are we having a high FPS gaming experience, but for the most part, it's very smooth and very consistent. There's just the occasional spike here and there, but while playing the game, it felt great. I could easily go through multiple runs of this game on here without any issues. If I didn't have an FPS counter there, I wouldn't even be thinking about performance. That you're able to play these kinds of games where you're going to be able to sit down and play with your friends and not really have to think about it. And since we're still on the topic, another title that I've been playing a lot of with my friends that we only just recently beat is Abiotic chaotic factor. I absolutely love this title. It is pretty much my favorite survival game ever. And being an Unreal 5 engine game, you wouldn't be wrong to assume that it would run pretty awfully on a system like this, even though the visuals of this game aren't exactly the highest quality. It's a surprisingly demanding game, but at the absolute lowest graphics settings, you are able to get a comfortably above 60 FPS average with 1% lows that are very close to that 60 mark. You could easily play the game like this without any issues whatsoever, but visually speaking, you are taking a pretty big hit. The game ends up looking a lot more like Half-Life than I think the developers even intended it for it to. But if you're willing to sacrifice some performance just by turning on the global illumination to its lowest setting, visually speaking, the game looks a lot more like itself. And keep in mind that in both situations here, I did have the textures maxed out. That's really not going to make a huge difference in a title like this just because of the fact that it's meant to look more retro. But the global illumination really makes the visuals look significantly better. It gives it a far more modern feel, to the point where I don't necessarily feel the need to turn up any other graphics settings. This already looks perfectly fine to me. And while yes, there is a pretty noticeable impact to the performance now that we're not at above 60 and the 1% lows took quite a pretty big hit there. Being a single player or co-op survival type game, I don't really see this impact as severe enough to not warrant turning on the global illumination. But that of course comes down to personal preference. But another title that I really like to play, even though I haven't played it in a while, is Hitman World of Assassination. When I played it, it was just called Hitman 3, but the performance here is pretty great. Yeah, we're running at the lowest in-game graphics settings and we are using FSR at the quality preset, but visually speaking, the game still looks pretty great. And the performance that we get out of that is more than adequate. Yeah, it's not going to be an above 60 FPS average, and yes, the 1% lows aren't exactly spectacular, but we're talking about a single player game here, and one where you don't need high reflexes or a high FPS to have an enjoyable experience. I mean, I grew up playing Hitman games on consoles, so I'm used to a 30 FPS gaming experience with these types of games. So the fact that we're able to get this level of performance, I really can't complain. Of course, there will be certain sections where the frame times do end up taking quite a bit of a hit because there's a lot of effects happening on screen. But in actual gameplay, those scenarios are usually in scenarios where you've caused an explosion, and a lot of the times you don't need a high reaction time for any of that. So you really won't feel those performance hiccups, and I think overall it's a great experience. Now, I did decide to try out another one of those titles that is one of the most popular games on Steam, one of the most played, and that is Delta Force. This is a title that I really didn't even know existed until very recently, and I've been playing quite a bit more of it, especially since playing the Battlefield beta and that ended. I've just been having that Battlefield itch, so I've been jumping into this for testing from time to time, and the performance out of it is pretty great. Of course, it is a mobile game, so it makes sense that it would be a title that is optimized to run well on low-end systems, and this does a pretty rock solid job. Yeah, the frame times aren't spectacular and they're not exactly the smoothest ever, and you can tell by the FPS average versus the 1% lows, but while actually playing the game, I really didn't have much to complain about. It is the lowest in-game graphics settings, but we do have the textures maxed out, and we are using FSR but at the quality preset, and like this, I could very comfortably play this game. Of course, I do think it's important to keep some perspective in terms of what you could realistically run on a system like this. Here you can see with Spider-Man 2 running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, though textures are maxed out, and we are using FSR but at the balanced preset, it's not exactly a great performer. The 1% lows are just too low for my liking, and while if I had absolutely no other way of playing this title, this would be a playable enough experience back when I was a kid at least, realistically with how well other titles perform, I don't think I would end up bothering with playing like this. But that is more of a personal preference thing, so you can really make a judgment call there. That said, you can turn down FSR even more down to performance or ultra performance, but understand that visually speaking, it's going to be less Spider-Man and more a ghostly creature that's fighting other ghostly creatures.
So jumping into Cinebench 2024, just to talk about CPU performance, the Ryzen 7 7845HS in this system is performing well in line with where it's supposed to at its set TDP. The single core performance is very nice and not that far behind Lunar Lake or Zen 5. It's a great performer, and higher TDP with higher clock speed Zen 4 processors are going to beat it out, but by not a significant margin. When we take a look at multi-core performance, it also shines here because at the TDP that it's at, it's essentially getting almost all of its performance, and it's very close to the performance of the Ryzen 9 365 that I have in a laptop, because that chip there, even though it's 10 cores, it only has a TDP of 25 watts sustained, and that really brings down its performance. So if you end up with a system with those chips that don't let you really turn up the TDP all that much, you're not that far away from the performance of this.
So as you can see, this thing still holds up pretty well in 2025. Sure, you're not going to be maxing out every single AAA title out there, but that was never going to be the case. In a lot of really popular titles though, you're going to get some great performance, even if you do have to make some sacrifices visually. At the price point that you're paying here, it's tough to really put together a gaming PC that isn't going to rely on used parts, especially because depending on where you live, you might not have a very wide selection when it comes to used. So something like this can be a pretty great value, especially if you're looking to pick up a computer for a kid. If you're trying to keep your kid from falling deep into mobile gaming, it's pretty great to get them something like this that's going to let them do all of their homework while still letting them play a lot of the popular games out there, but it's not such a monster that you have to worry about them getting too sucked into games. Now, of course, they can still play Roblox on here, they can still play some of the most popular titles out there, and I do suggest that as a parent you pay attention to what your kids are playing. I mentioned Roblox specifically because it's one of those titles that, being also a mobile game, it encourages some very bad spending habits. And if you've been looking at the news recently in relation to Roblox, you know that there are some very major problems with the community there. So that's one of the benefits of going with a system like this for a kid, because if I'm a parent, I'd rather have my kids playing Peak with their friends or with their siblings than hopping on Roblox and talking to whoever. So one of these systems is really great to pick up for pretty much any student out there, whether they are in elementary school, middle school, or high school, or even college age students. You know, this is essentially getting them a laptop, but that is in a very small form factor, and they're able to use a monitor with a keyboard and mouse. I really do think that mini PCs are great companions to laptops, because when you have a powerful 8-core 16-thread CPU with an iGPU that has this good a level of performance, you can skimp out a lot more on a laptop. You don't really necessarily have to get a really high performance device. You can get something cheap, because really a lot of the times I would suggest for college students out there, if you don't have software that relies on Windows, getting something like an M1 Mac is still a great choice. You spend $600 on that. You spend what, $400, $450 at most with this, depending on the configuration that you want to go with on RAM and SSD, and still for cheaper than a system with a Ryzen HX 370, you're able to have both a laptop and a mini PC. Both of them don't take up a lot of space. You can have both in a dorm room, and they don't produce a lot of heat. That's one of the things that I really love about these mini PCs. As someone that lives in Texas, the summers here are brutal, and when I'm gaming on my i9 12900K and RX 6950 XT gaming PC, the amount of heat that produces while I'm just trying to play something like Abiotic Factor is insane. It will heat up my room so much that it'll get up to 82 degrees Celsius while my AC is at full blast, because essentially what I'm doing is I'm running AC just to run a space heater next to it. The definition of insanity right there. While a system like this, the whole package fully loaded, uses less power than just the CPU on my gaming PC. This thing is not heating up my room when I'm playing any single game. Now, yes, it's not performing as well as that whole desktop is, but I'm able to play Abiotic Factor on this thing. And at the end of the day, when I'm just playing with my friends, that's kind of the only thing that matters. And you know, if I was using this instead of my full desktop PC, I also wouldn't have to go full gamer mode and just play shirtless while sweating and having an AC blasting next to me. These are considerations that a lot of the times people don't think about until they're in those scenarios. scenarios. Yeah, a gaming PC is awesome until it heats up your room so much that you don't even want to play anything anymore. And if you have multiple kids, you know, you're looking to buy a system like this for your child or multiple kids, that's another one of the benefits of this. If you have 3 of these running in your house, fully loaded, that's still using less power than just the GPU of my gaming PC. By a significant margin, honestly. There's still a very wide gap there. I think I could probably fit about 5 of these with the power budget that GPU has. You know, even with monitors and keyboards and all of that hooked up to multiple of these, the whole power usage of all of those setups is going to be less than just one gaming PC. That's not a bad deal there, especially because you can pick up a lot of these for cheap. If you're picking these up for your kids to be able to just play games and do their homework, you put in 16 gigabytes of RAM, you put in 512 gigabyte SSD in there, you get as many of these as you need, and boom, you're good to go. You didn't need to spend a lot of money. You didn't need to buy a 32 gigabyte unit or a 1 terabyte unit that realistically wasn't going to end up getting used. And now you're in the perfect spot where you're not taking up a lot of space. Your kids don't need to compromise on what they can have on their desks, or they have this big box next to their desk that is just throwing out heat. This can just be on there on the table, which is also great because it helps with dust. When you have a PC on the floor, it's a vacuum cleaner. It is just sucking up all the dust, so you're gonna have to clean up that system all the time. This on a desk, because it's elevated, it's gonna get less dust in it, and you're gonna have to maintain it a lot less, especially because it's not this big box that has so many fans around it that it's just sucking everything up just to maintain cool temperatures. There are some big savings that can be had with something like this. Space savings, energy savings, and of course, saving on the price. So check out the link down below, and down below there are also going to be some discount codes that you guys can use to get this at an even cheaper price. So check it out down below. I'll catch you guys in the next one.